Good morning, colleagues. I think we're still waiting for a few people to join, but while that's happening, I'd like to very warmly welcome you to the second of our online symposiums around the specific projects within Ty's Living Lab. So let me say something about Ty's Living Lab, and then I will introduce the panel to you. Ty's Living Lab is a partnership between industry and government to accelerate modernisation of transport infrastructure. And there's a whole range of projects in that space, covering a wide range of activities through to offsite manufacture, data capture and management, and just generally looking at how we can modernise learning from other sectors and innovate how we do things. And we are at the stage now where the innovation projects, the research projects, are reaching their conclusion, and we want to start sharing the outcomes with you, our wider community. And as I said, today is the second of 4 online events, and then we have 2 set-piece conferences. Now, a word on those, if I may, at the moment. They're heavily oversubscribed, but we have reserved places for anybody who attends all of our online events. So if you attended the last one and you're attending this one, stay with it, because you'll be guaranteed a place in the conferences. And there will also be a draw for an iPad. The purpose of modernising transport infrastructure is simple. It is a huge investment for government. It's of central importance to the UK economy, and it is underdeveloped in terms of modernisation. So we want to accelerate that. A crucial aspect of transport infrastructure is its social value. Now, this is a word or phrase that you've heard a lot about recently and probably not before. In fact, it's a new phrase for something that we've known for a long time: the vital importance of transport infrastructure to connect people, particularly people in more hard-pressed communities, and to create what we might call engagement or inclusion, as well as the wider economic benefits. And those spending the government investment are increasingly expected to demonstrate the social value of their activities, whether they be operators, infrastructure suppliers, or manufacturers, as well as the clients themselves. So it's vitally important that we accurately measure and report on the social value of our investments. But because this is a modernisation project, we wanted to bring some modernisation to that relatively new approach of measuring social value. And this is a very exciting area for the industry, because it allows the industry to demonstrate what we all know, that it's a vital part of our social and economic fabric. So I'm Neil Robertson. I'm chair of the Programme Delivery Board for Ty's Living Lab and chief executive of NSAR. And NSAR's got a long experience of working in this space, particularly around workforce value. But the panelists today have got a wider perspective and are experts in their field, and I'm delighted to bring them to you. So I'll just quickly introduce them now, if I may, and then we'll ask them to speak in turn. So first we have Jamie. Jamie is a founding partner of Akerlof, who are one of our project partners. They're a leading management consultant, and they specialise in modern methods of construction generally. Jamie has been a fantastic champion all the way through this, and a very valued member of the wider team. He was previously at Kia Construction, where he was group lead for Offsite Solutions and MMC, as we like to use the acronym. So Jamie will be speaking first and is very well qualified. I'll briefly say something about Gerard and Liz so you know what's coming, and then I'll introduce them more fully later. So Gerard is another of our project partners, and he is CEO of the 55 group, which takes a wider view of the world, a very impressive view of the world in my view, and looks at software and solutions for the built environment sector. A particular brand, Loop, is the hat that Gerard will be wearing today, but he has a number of hats. And he lives in the frozen north, so he needs those hats. Gerard's an expert and very experienced in this space, as you will see, and has really brought the benefits of his knowledge from other sectors to the project. So we're looking forward to hearing from Gerard after Jamie. And we're delighted to be joined by Liz Holford from Network Rail. She's the National Strategic and Technical Lead around social performance. A critical role, as I've mentioned, because Network Rail benefit from a lot of government investment, and the expectations on demonstrating the wider value for that are growing exponentially. So no pressure, Liz, and a big thank you for coming along to say something. Liz isn't a sort of formal member of the project. She's part of our wider kind of advisory team and constructive critical friends. And Liz's role is to sort of set in context the developments today, and perhaps use her, just for sport, use her in-depth knowledge of this topic to ask Gerard and Jamie some really brainy, difficult questions. So we're hoping for that later. It's not quite feeding the Christians to the lions, but there will be an element of that, I hope, just for fun. Anyway, Jamie and Gerard are more than up for that. So Liz, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll say a bit more. We'll hear a bit more from you later. So back to our two initial inputs, where we will be hearing in more detail about what the project has produced, what its benefits might be to the wider community. A word on benefits is we've asked the speakers to say from their perspective what those benefits, they think those benefits are. Within the project, we have an analytical consortium who measure and validate all the benefits, including the social benefits. So we will be reporting on those later. So any numbers you hear today, you must consider the views of the panelists, wise views of the panelists, and provisional. With that caveat, Jamie, may I invite you to introduce your contribution to TIE's Living Lab and your view of the future and its impact. Thank you.
Neil, thanks. Good morning, everyone. As Neil said, my name is Jamie Hillier. I'm a partner at Akerlof. I'm just going to see if I can load up my screen as I talk, which hopefully you can begin to see some of my slides. As Neil mentioned, we as a consultancy, we specialise in advising around the subjects of modern methods construction, alongside providing work and support towards environmental, social and governance, so ESG issues. And really, with that background and backdrop, for the next 10 minutes or so, I want to just build upon the introduction that Neil's afforded us and give you a bit of an overview around the themes of modern methods of construction alongside the principles of social value, really to outline the context and purpose of the project, but also to give set the scene in advance of Gerard explaining a little bit more around the MMC social value calculator itself. So in fairness to Neil, he has given a really good introduction, and I wanted just to embellish that slightly further, but begin at the sort of basic starting point by outlining what is social value, which I suspect most of you will already know. Now you can see on the screen the Social Value UK's definition. And for me, people really sit at the heart and core of social value. Certainly in the context of the built environment, social value is created when buildings, places, or certainly for today, infrastructure support the environmental, economic and social well-being, and in do so start to improve people's quality of life. Exactly which environmental, economic and social outcomes create that social value really depends upon the interests of those that are, I guess, impacted by the project or built asset, and therefore is really context specific. So to inform the evaluation of this, the measurement that is so important, as Neil referenced, many projects and businesses now use structured frameworks and social value quantification tools, both in forecasting, measuring, and also recording impact at those targeted activities as part of a social value strategy. Our focus within this project was to build upon those principles, but take cognizance and consideration towards the implication and impact that applying modern methods of construction can have on that. Now, MMC, in referencing it, is, I think, a particularly broad term. And from my perspective, I see it as contemporary innovations in construction, including new technologies, off-site manufacture and efficient use of processes that is applied to deliver productive, sustainable and better outcomes. Simplistically, trying to capture that within the graphic that you can see on the screen, which includes platforms, so a term referencing standard repeatable solutions, includes design for manufacture and assembly that unlocks and enables manufactured off-site activities supported by the application of digital technologies and delivered through repeatable industrialized processes. Bit of a mouthful, and certainly a lot to take on board. The breadth of what I've just described, I think, is really wide, but so too is the impact that the adoption of MMC can start to have upon social value. And I guess just to reinforce that point, just take a moment to think about the shift in moving work activity from a on-site location to an off-site manufactured factory. Now, the aspiration to move work to a more safe environment that offers stability of employment and opportunity to a more diverse pool of labour is, of course, appealing and should enhance quality of life. However, at the moment, the majority of social value quantification doesn't really reflect that level of granularity that I've just described, and in fact, it's quite often anchored to evaluate the impact relative to the geographical proximity of site. So therefore, when projects go to shift the location of their workplace from employing off-site solutions, they quite often inadvertently fail to capture, or probably more appropriately lose, the social contribution of the work because it's outside a defined site radius. Now that for me, I guess, is an illustration that the methodology and current tools are in many respects really equipped to deal with what is a pretty basic shift, and that starts to work against the direction that our industry is being encouraged to adopt. Those current tools aren't necessarily addressing the basic challenges, let alone the realities, which I think, as I'll explain, are far more complex than this sort of simplistic example. So the project that we've been working in conjunction with Gerard's team and members also from Kier was designed first and foremost to research and understand the implications and relationship between social value and MMC, and then to build upon that insight to develop a digital toolset that is in tune with the direction of the industry by distinguishing and quantitatively evaluating the impact of MMC upon social value in a manner that we hope can support and enable teams to make informed decisions, but do so with ease and clarity. Now, whilst I think that's really important. I think just to highlight the point, it's worthwhile reminding ourselves of the policy that's driving the adoption of MMC to deliver better societal outcomes. And Neil sort of referenced or alluded to this earlier. I've put on the screen a couple of documents which you can hopefully see. You've got the construction playbook and the national infrastructure strategy. Both are explicit in directing the public sector to apply MMC where it affords best value, but do so also in a manner that strengthens the union to level up. And in fact, under the playbook particularly, which has comply or explain principles embedded within it, business cases are required to set out how they start to impact different places. And the tip roadmap, which you can see on the right hand side, which we contributed to, identified a clear link between the adoption of MMC and the creation of a disaggregated manufacturing industry to deliver societal gains. So pretty heavy stuff within there. You then also got above that the Green Book refresh and public procurement policy notes 0620, which again reinforced the requirement to demonstrably incorporate social value calculation. All good intended policy, but actually the practicalities of doing so is not always as easy as project teams may necessarily like. Now earlier, I guess I illustrated how the shift in locality of workplace alone had a bearing upon social impact, but there are, when you start to look at MMC and consider it, there are a multitude of other considerations and variances in profile, some of which you can see listed on the screen. They are not, to be clear, necessarily all in favour of MMC. And in fact, as we've begun to map those points of sensitivity, we've learned that MMC has the potential to create as much, if not more, positive impact than traditional construction. However, the profile is certainly different, and tensions definitely exist. So it requires an adaptation in our approach, not least to expand the definition of local to reflect local to site, but also pick up local to off-site manufacturing facilities. It requires us to consider and develop a better range of metrics associated with environmental and sustainability impact, particularly where off-site is referenced as being a positive step forward, but in fact that isn't always necessarily substantiated by a clear evidence base. And also we need to recognise the tension and interest in meeting both local and national priorities. This, for me, I think is where certainly the transport infrastructure sector is more mature than others, but nonetheless, we need to acknowledge there are competing priorities. And I think for me, I've posted this map on the screen, which illustrates this point. It overlays the location of off-site manufacturing facilities, which you can hopefully see in the sort of white dots, against a scale of deprivation across England, highlighted in the shades of pink. And this demonstrates that the clustering of manufacturing facilities in areas of greater need, and therefore there is a potential to create sustainable employment in these areas, inject investment, and simultaneously offset skill shortages that might exist in other areas such as London. It also visibly illustrates the potential to realise the levelling up agenda by sharing economic benefits more equitably. But the ability, I guess, to consider these sort of economic dynamics and insight, particularly at project level, with all the pressures that schemes are dealing with, is ordinarily beyond the reach of most. So to achieve the ambitions of the national infrastructure and other central government policy, we identified pretty early on that our project teams need support. They need enablers that translate strategy into clear, concise recommendations. They need quantitative feedback that enables them to make informed operational decisions. That is certainly not going to happen overnight. And it's really a journey that involves consistent articulation and measurement of social value to support value-based comparisons and evaluation. I hope the research work that we have done to date through this project and the tools that I know Gerard and his team have been developing, going to talk through very shortly, will aid organisations along that pathway, and as well as catalyse others to start collaborating in developing accurate social MMC, social value forecasts that can enable us as an industry not only to do things better, but also to begin to do better things. So that's my presentation. I'll stop there and I will hand over to Gerard. Thanks a lot.
Jamie, that was a hugely impressive presentation. Thank you so much for it. And I ask the audience to hold your comments and questions on what Jamie said and what Jamie needs. What we need slide at the end is particularly interesting and challenging. So we'll come back to that, and there'll be the opportunity to use the chat and to ask questions. And but first, let's hear from Gerard. As I mentioned, Gerard is very experienced in this environment, the built environment generally, and now much more in transport infrastructure. And he has been engaging with a number of clients and sees this question from a number of perspectives. And Loop are at the forefront of, if you like, software solutions in this space. And so Gerard is absolutely the right person to be talking to us. And we've been very impressed by their contribution to the TIES Living Lab project. So Gerard, over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Neil, and morning, everybody. And just firstly, Jamie, I'm sure I hope you haven't taken my saying there. I love the saying, and it's absolutely right. You know, if we can do things better, we can do better things, and that's really what social value is really about. I mean, we talk a lot about in our business about every pound having a purpose, supporting skills, supporting economic activity, supporting different things, and that's really what we want to really try and foster. I also, Neil mentioned earlier, I'm from up north, and I noticed on Jamie's map there was a high concentration of the MMC providers in our area. I live in Hull, actually, or just outside of Hull, and we do have a lot of experience of developing new ways of doing things in our sector. So it's a great area to be in terms of that. So I'm going to talk to you this morning about who we are, a little bit about what we do, a little bit about Loop and TIES Living Lab, and then really about getting involved. Because if you want to see some of the work we've done in detail, I'd love to show you that on demos, but there would be better sort of one-to-ones or in sort of separate webinars, because they take a little bit of time to be delivered. Firstly, a bit of context. I always talk about this, but we're in a sector which is worth about £100 billion a year. The built environment, it employs nearly 3 million people and over 300,000 companies in it. It's a big sector, important to the UK PLC. But we probably don't use technology enough, and we certainly are not using data enough to help drive decision making. So, you know, we try and build tools to try and address that. And we really need to have an industry that's probably aligned to the future workforce. And again, that's part of what we try and do with the tools we develop. So let me tell you a little bit about who we are as we go forward. I'll move on to my next slide. Okay, so Neil mentioned earlier it's the 55 group. We are a fairly broad group now that work in the built environment. We have procurement frameworks, which are Pagabo and MyPagabo. We're bringing some new technology into procurement itself. We have Loop, which I'm going to talk a little bit more detail about, which is our social value business. Cypro, we have two products, contract management and risk management, and asset management now is a new product. We have a learning platform, which again is delivering learning in a very much a digital and data-driven way. And we have what we call the future construction, which is our own sort of R&D sort of side to our business, where we're looking for the new ideas, the new ways of doing things, and those innovations that will help support our industry going forward. Because we need to sort of look at ways of improving productivity in this sector, and MMC is a great way of doing that, and delivering better outcomes for people, a better environment, more skills, to try and address one of the big challenges that we have in our world really at the moment, which is the transition from fossil fuels into renewables, and the built environment is going to play a big part in that. So let's talk a little bit about what we do at Loop. So we do a couple of things here at Loop. So firstly, it's important to understand that we have a consultancy business. We have 4 economists who work for us, and they come from the private and the public sector. So we have ex-government economists, and what they do is they produce a lot of consultancy work for our clients, and those clients are in government. Those clients are contractors, they're local authorities, and the sort of wider range of clients. We're also working more in the private sector now around ESG, which is effectively another form, or the development of the Social Value Act. And the consultants, the economists, also work on developing the algorithms, the KPIs that we use as our baseline software. We produce social value software. We have a product called Loop, which is available and again is used by clients and contractors and that whole sort of ecosystem. And what the software does is it does the heavy lifting really. It allows you to it's delivered as what's called a SaaS product online, and it allows you to or allows clients to actually forecast, monitor and evaluate the projects or the activities they're undertaking, whether that be developing a building, a new school, or whether it be sort of developing a carbon reduction plan inside a school. You know, you're able to actually use our software to select the KPIs that you want to measure, and we can actually then give you monetized and non-monetized value. So, you know, you're able to see if you create jobs, you can actually see the value of those jobs in terms of the money that is being saved by not having to pay benefits, the money that's being given to the exchequer in terms of tax receipts, and also the well-being that the individual will have. We also measure the economic impact. The work you do in an area allows you to actually measure the actual impact of that work in that geography, because as Jamie has sort of referenced, work in Hull it has more value possibly than work elsewhere because of the nature of employment and unemployment. And then the third area is we measure the environmental impact, which is becoming ever more important. So MMC offers a great opportunity for this, because a traditional building site, you might have lots and lots of deliveries, whereas if the products are built off-site using modern methods, the deliveries may be much shorter, and the work is actually done inside the factory environment. So the impact on the environment is quite different, and is hopefully a lot more favourable. The third thing we do is social value business cases. So we work with a whole host of organisations to help them evidence the work they've done. That's across sports trusts, it's across local authority clients, it's across government clients, and even more so now in the private sector, where we're demonstrating the value of work that is done and providing that evidence that they may need for their stakeholders, or to help them in supporting the work they do for their shareholders sometimes. So that's what we do at Loop. What we've done with Loop and Tide. So we've done 3 things really. The first thing was we worked very closely with our partners and the industry to develop KPIs for the infrastructure sector, and also a methodology of how to use that inside modern methods. The government is obviously pushing modern methods as a way that to unlock a whole host of things: one, productivity; one, speed, innovation, and also it changes the way skills are used. So we've had to develop a number of different KPIs, because when you compare traditional manufacture versus modern methods, you will look at things quite differently, whether it be the environmental I mentioned, whether the skills, because the skills that you will accrue in a modern method environment will be delivered inside possibly a factory, so you'll be using factory and reproductive sorts of technologies, which are different to some of the tools that you would use on site. So we developed a whole range of KPIs, and across our product now, we have nearly 600 KPIs to measure a whole host of things. They're contained in a number of categories in employment, environment, social return, etc. But there's about 600 KPIs that we have in our system. We have then took the second piece, which was to create a suite of tools specifically to evaluate modern methods versus traditional. Now, in simple terms, what this does is it allows a client in that optioneering phase to compare side by side the impact, the impact and the cost of producing a project using modern methods versus traditional. And the way we do that is, if we took an example and said the school that we wanted to build was going to be £20 million in a traditional environment, we could run that through our tools, and that might generate a social value on a monetized basis of, say, £40 million. If we were to look at that using traditional, what we can actually do, we can then compare that, and it might cost more. It might be £30 million because some of the techniques are actually more expensive. However, the actual impact, the outcome of doing it in that way might be more. So that might be 50 or 60. So what it does is it doesn't make the decision for our clients, but it provides some more evidence and some more, and it does the heavy lifting to show that where you want to actually put your focus in terms of the outcomes, you might find that you can actually deliver more, but by paying more. So it helps with that whole understanding of that decision. And our tools are very simple to use. They're all online. We have a little thing we call a graphic equalizer. So you're actually able to actually spread the costs of the project between 100% traditional through to 100% modern methods. And you're also able to choose the different types of modern methods. So there are typically, Mark Farm has identified 7 types of modern methods of construction, ranging from small manufactured components, which might be light fittings or lights or elements that are put into lights, through all the way to sort of large off-site construction, or I call it big Meccano or big Lego. But there is actually quite a broad church between the two. And our software allows you to actually choose how much is done off-site and on-site, and of what type the MMC is. So it gives a very complex, it makes a very complex sort of calculation very simple to actually use in a user-friendly way. We've now incorporated these new features within our Loop ecosystem, so they are available as part of our normal Loop software. So clients are able to become part of that, and where they want to actually compare traditional and modern methods, they've got those tools there. So the benefits, as we sort of see them, specific KPIs, very much sector focus, supporting the industry, and as Jamie mentioned, the construction playbook and government policy and thinking are very important to us. Construction playbook particularly, because that is a theme throughout many of the things we do, and supporting innovation, the use of technology, the use of SMEs, that whole approach, making sure people have that value, that productivity piece is extremely important to everything we should be doing. And we believe the work we've done with Tyres Living Lab gives us those extra tools to really try and leverage what it says. Because as Jamie said, it is a complier explain. You should, or central government is certainly asked to use tradition, to use MMC against traditional, and the tools we've developed will allow people to be able to do that. The technology does the heavy lifting and the heavy thinking, and that's the way I sort of summarize this. Some of the calculations that you would have to do to try and provide that evidence can be quite extensive. So the work we've done with our economists, working with our stakeholder partners within Tyres and also with central governments, actually have done all the work for you. So it makes the use of, or it makes that whole process much easier to understand. We work very closely with Her Majesty's Treasury, so we align everything we do to what's called Her Majesty's Treasury Green Book. So that ensures that there is compliance at the complete level there in terms of what government is saying should happen. So the technology does that for you. And the final piece is it gives you that platform for optioneering, so you can make those better decisions, showing that every pound actually does have a purpose. Optioneering is a real tool that we're now bringing through everything we do. So, the ability for large or small or medium projects to have the benefit of what if we did it this way, what if we did it that way. It allows us to be able to make those sort of judgments much more easily. And I think that is something that is going to be real value to the wider infrastructure industry. So that's what our tool does. Get involved. I would love to give a demo to people. So anybody at all who would like to see the software, please contact us. I think our address and our details will be available, and we can do that. A demo would take 30 to 45 minutes, but once you see the software and the work we've done as a result of this work, as a result of our work with the Living Lab, I think you'll see that you've got a set of tools there which can really help everybody in that space. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Gerard, thank you. Excellent. A really, really concise overview. And like Jamie, we're grateful to you for locating what we're doing in the wider policy. It's interesting because when we started Living Lab under the TIES banner a number of years ago, government policy in this space was less developed than it is now. And the two documents that have been mentioned, the TIP roadmap and the construction playbook, really have taken us forward and are very much in keeping with what we're trying to do at TIES Living Lab, which is to accelerate the modernisation. And whilst our project plan was conceived before those documents were published, we're not surprised that there is a very good synergy between them. And what we want to do is to demystify modernisation and accelerate it by showing people how it can be done. So demonstrating to them what can be done, and actually that it's not that easy. And of course, a big part of that is the benefits of it. And Gerard and Jamie have both spoken eloquently about what their work allows clients to do. Now, before you ask questions, and I hope you will, so please be sharpening your pencils, make comments, ask questions through the chat function. I'd like to introduce Liz in a little more detail. Ask Liz to say something, and I think Liz might have some questions for Gerard and Jamie. So I mentioned that Liz is Network Rail's National Strategic and Technical Lead around social performance. Her background is around sustainability, supply chain and social value for almost 20 years. And she's worked on flagship projects such as London Bridge Station development, don't get much more flagship than that, and within local authorities as well. So like Gerard, a wider built environment experience, and she's a member of Social Value UK and is working with partners to develop the rail social value tool, which I hope Liz might say something about that. But more generally, Liz, we're encouraging people to use modern methods in all their work, and this is an example of how to take forward their social value thinking. Are we right to do that? If we are, where are we at on that journey?
So the answer is yes. And where we are on the journey is, as I think Jamie explained really well earlier, the concept of getting better at managing social value and indeed monetizing it and bringing it into decision making is one that's moving really quickly. It's come into particular prominence with the publication of the UK government social value model, procurement policy note 0620 back in 2020, which really brought England in line with Wales and Scotland. And has put a mandate onto arm's length bodies such as Network Rail to integrate social value into our even better into our procurement processes. So that's really driven it. But why we're thinking about social value in even more depth in Network Rail is because the stakeholders that we work with to bring in funding for rail projects, to get planning permission for rail projects, just to work with to deliver rail projects. So for example, local authorities up in the northeast of England who are co-funding station redevelopments, they want to know what social value we are going to deliver in return for work for their support and their money, and they want us to report on it. So it's really those drivers that led RSSB, Network Rail and other rail stakeholders to start creating the Rail Social Value tool a few years ago. Network Rail has been using it since November. We're what's known as an early adopter of it. We've got about 100 people in our business who are using the Rail Social Value tool at the moment. The Rail Social Value tool will have a full industry launch next week. So there'll be a lot more information out there in the public domain than there is at the moment. And just to clarify that the Rail Social Value tool is separate from the MMC calculator that we're talking about at the moment. But I think, Gerard, I'm right in saying that you're looking at the possibility of joining them up so that we could use the MMC calculator for optioneering of rail works, rail projects and programs, and then continue to use the Rail Social Value tool as we are in Network Rail for monitoring and evaluation of the social value that comes about as a result of those projects and programs.
Let's thank you.
Do you want to say something?
No, Gerard, let's come back to that question. And I think Liz might have some other questions for you, but Liz, I've got a question for you first. In terms of your role, what are the biggest challenges you face in terms of helping Network Rail as one major client within the wider transport infrastructure space really be best in class, you know, show good practice in this space? What are your challenges?
So the first challenge is actually bringing people into a common place around what social value is. You know, the definition that Jamie shared earlier is one that's out there and being used, but actually people struggle to get their heads around what that means. What I'm finding really helpful in Network Rail is when I share with people what the 12 impact areas are, under which indicators are organised within the Rail Social Value tool, and what some of those indicators are. People kind of go, oh, I get it. Okay, yeah. So social value is about X, Y, and Z. So that really helps people. There is still something we need to move on from is thinking about social value as being about volunteering and charitable activities and apprenticeships. It's you know, we're moving on from that. Yeah. What we're also having to spend time talking about, particularly with our supply chain, is that when we monetize our social value, we need to use values that measure outcomes and that are compliant with UK Treasury Green Book principles in exactly the way that Gerard explained, because some of the commercial tools on the market measure the input. So they measure the kind of cost of the business of the time that's been spent to do the volunteering, or to do the curriculum support in schools, or the safety talks. And those are not measures that are okay for us. So it's really great that all the Loop products use outcome-based valuations. So on valuations of workforce volunteering hours, for example, the Loop products actually value the social value that results from those hours, not the cost of doing those hours. So that's a little bit of a kind of health warning to anybody here who's looking at the market at the moment for what products to buy. We're, you know, those that look at outcomes are really important. I know, Enzo, you've been thinking about this, haven't you, for a while?
We have, and people, anybody who thinks that social value is soft and fluffy has not met our colleagues, the government economists. And no, that's not an oxymoron. They're very wise and know the difference between an input, an output, and an outcome. And the wool cannot be pulled over their eyes. Not that I'm calling them sheep; they are more like wolves. So Liz, you operate in a tough environment there. I know that from my own day job, and I'm well done for guiding industry through that. And in fact, you know, industry colleagues on this call, you know, this really is something that we all need to be good at, now, because I've been very impressed personally with the government's commitment to the political phrase is levelling up. And but what the audience should be under no illusions about is that this isn't just a thing that's going to go away. This is now cemented in, and Liz, thank you for referencing the policy note. That this is part of how we do business now, and well done to colleagues like Jamie and Gerard for spotting the future and investing time and energy in it. And also thank you, of course, to our funders, DFT and IUK, for co-investing. Now, I think you were going to suggest that Gerard says something about the potential relationship between this wider transport tool and the rail-specific tool. Do you have other questions first, though, for Gerard and Jamie?
I'm going to go big picture, if that's okay, and ask what would they like to see as the legacy coming out of their contribution to Ty's Living Lab? Okay, great. So whilst we'll give Gerard and Jamie 30 seconds to reflect on that big picture question, and I've got a question for you in the audience. Please, can you now think of your questions? We have a questions function which you can address to us. All reasonable questions will be attended to by our panel, and you can ask Liz questions as well, although she's really here to ask the questions, but I'm sure she'll take some. So I'll go to you first, Gerard. So you've got two questions, the big picture and then the more technical question.
Okay, can I deal with the second one first, Neil, if that's okay?
Please do.
Okay. So our business has been, towards the end of now, nearly 2.5-year project with the rail sector, led by the Rail Safety Standards Board, and we've developed quite a lot of KPIs, and it's great that Liz has sort of focus on what they are, because they are outcome-based valuations. That's a really important distinction to actually have, because inputs are really more about CSR, and it's the old way of looking at things and that sort of stuff. And that's really it's not helpful if you're going to make proper decisions going forward. You really do need to understand that impact that you're going to have and that outcome. So that's why I always, inside our business now, I always use every pound has a purpose. It's about finding that purpose, rather than every pound has just been, collected in terms of doing that. Now, going forward, so what we have now gone, or Network Rail have been using it for several months now, and there is an industry-wide release next week. So that's going to be fantastic. So there'll be quite a lot more of the stakeholders. So a number of train operating companies and the wider supply chain will start to get access to this. So in the rail social value tool. So that's going to be great. So in effect, the tool we've developed is going to become at the heart of the rail sector. Now, obviously, with the close ties with the DFT, there's an opportunity to look at bringing some of the work we've done there and connecting it to the work we've done at Ty's Living Lab, because that project sort of ran alongside it. So we have a roadmap. We have still got some discussions, but we have a real good opportunity now to bring the tools together. So and really actually have the rail infrastructure KPIs aligned very closely to what happens in modern methods, and it's interesting really, because in one area of investment, the rail sector is particularly good at MMC. I mean, anybody who knows anything about bridges is you wouldn't build a bridge on site in a traditional format. You would build it off site and then sort of assemble it in that way. So there's a real opportunity, and if we can bring those two things together, which we've got a strong roadmap on now, I think that will be a really good sort of tool for the sector, and hopefully something to build upon. In terms of legacy,
thank you for the plug on footbridges. That's the topic of a future online event. So we didn't plan this, but that's how joined up we all are. So yeah, you'll hear more about it's a future event. So thank you, Gerard, for that plug. Now you've got a much harder question from Liz, which is a more general one, a big picture. Do you want to have a go at that, and then we'll see what Jamie says?
Okay, so the big picture for me is really, the government's made some investments. in the Living Lab, and the sector has made investment in these tools. So a real big picture outcome for this would be using the tools. Let's make sure that they're used across the various stakeholders across both our SSP and also in Ty's Living Lab. We've developed them. They're there to be used. They're there to be trialed. And this is not a final destination, to use a rail analogy there. It's a journey we're going on. And every year, government thinking, best practice, industry thinking, and literature reviews do change the way we actually see the world around economics. And it's important to be able to build that in. So let's use them. Let's also integrate them into Construction Playbook 2. There's a new version of Construction Playbook coming out. There's no reason why the thinking we've developed here, that Akerlof and ourselves and all the other contributors have done, we should actually build that straight into CP2 and then make that the central piece. And then really, it's just taking everything we do and making it government policy. There's the whole green paper on procurement, which is going to become a white paper, I think, later this year, and possibly legislation next year. There's a lot of discussion about social value. There's a lot of discussion about sort of reviewing the process. We have obviously different areas of government who have different views on that, but collectively we have done awful lot of work, a lot of the heavy lifting to get to where we are. So the bigger picture for me is let's now actually integrate it, because we have those tools and it will help us deliver that final piece for me, which is every pound has a purpose. And with the tools we have, we can evidence it.
Gerard, thank you. And that was a very knowledgeable comment, I think. And there's a couple of themes I want to pick up on, and maybe the audience will as well. But first, Jamie, do you see the world similarly to Gerard? I hope not. It'd be more fun if you think that's completely wrong.
Well, I definitely don't have the same skill of slipping in any transport analogies in there, Neil. But I think for
just say we're on track and you'll be fine.
There you go. I'll keep teeing you up. I think, yeah, I would echo exactly what Gerard's described. I mean, for me, in terms of legacy, I think part of our vision is to mature the understanding and awareness around those themes of social value. And Liz quite rightly has highlighted that the range. You've got extremities like the economists in central government, and then others that at the other end of the spectrum that have a real lack of understanding. So for me to raise that baseline awareness, to shift the understanding of what social value is, so that more people can engage and deliver it, then all the better. And I think the other piece is by effectively leading the way, I hope with absolute sort of sincerity that it will stimulate and catalyse others to follow suit. And I say that because I think you touched upon the principles of levelling up. It's very easy, particularly when we read the papers on a daily basis, to think that it is rhetoric, that it's some sort of political football. But the reality is absolutely not. The UK, unfortunately, is sort of one of the most regionally imbalanced countries in the world. And I think I'll probably get my statistics wrong, but I think there's almost a 19 or 20 year difference in healthy life expectancy between sort of the UK's most prosperous areas and those that are more deprived. That for me, in the current day, is just unacceptable. And therefore, in working in the built environment, in what we do, we have a huge bearing on the quality of life. And therefore, if we can, in some way, shape or form, stimulate others to improve that, then for me that has to be a positive step forward.
Brilliant, Jamie, thank you. And again, some great themes in there. It's a remarkable consensus around the importance of this cross-party. I've not met, and for years, I mean, I've been involved in this, including from a government policy perspective. I've never seen such a coherent approach. It's really quite impressive. We've got policy coherence, we've got synergies with people's philosophies. The statistics are there to back it up, and you gave one. I was born and spent the first part of my life in the most socially mobile postcode in the UK. And I remember being asked about this on Alan Milburn's social mobility work, because is quite interesting as to why and how. But you know, we can deliver. We can deliver, to Gerard's point about the pound, we can spend that pound so much better if we just reflect on how we do it. And just understanding what drives the changes in the metrics that Liz mentioned. You know, it doesn't cost much to do things differently. And sometimes we're doing it and not telling people, that's some of it, but actually more often and more exciting is with a small change in our processes, we can have a big impact. And you know, just one simple area from my experience is where, not just where we locate our. Jamie mentioned the off-site manufacturing facilities, for example, but it's also where we do our recruitment and how we do our recruitment, and just simple steps to build bridges between those who are perhaps not ready, would like an apprenticeship, but not quite ready for it. And it doesn't cost anything. And government's educational policy, believe it or not, is also in alignment. So I'm at many events where people say there's a fragmentation of government policy. Well, we've got no excuse here at all. Now, we've got some questions coming in. So for the whole panel, it's quite a general question from Timothy. What other metrics were considered for measuring social outcomes? So I'm going to go to you first, Gerard, on that one. What other metrics were considered? Presumably that means metrics that were considered but perhaps not included in the tool and in the Green Book, or perhaps more specifically, which ones are we focusing on perhaps more?
Okay, so well, the first thing to say is there are an awful lot of metrics in there. So we've got the outcome areas, which are the categories, as Liz mentioned, and the impact areas. I think we have a very thorough sort of coverage of the metrics. I mean, one thing I would say is if you get a number of economists in the room, you know, you don't always get immediate agreement because people do have a particular view on certain things. And, you know, we've been on calls with many government cabinet office economists, and they certainly do have a different view. But I think the way I explain this to the rail sector and also to the DfT is we're going on a journey here, and back to your rail analogy a bit there, the rail that point, and to answer Timothy's specific point, what we don't know what we don't know, and I think we will uncover areas of additional KPIs or new ways of measuring things as we go on that journey. This is not a one-off, thank you very much, you know, we'll work on the next piece. This is a 5-year plan which will hopefully develop into a 10-year and then into a longer sort of embedded into it. So I think if there are any areas that become more relevant, I think we will actually start and find ways to measure them. I personally think society is facing two big things at the moment. One is the aging population, and two is the transfer from fossil fuels into renewables. So I can see more development in those particular areas. I think the environmental ones will certainly develop because scope 3 management of carbon, for example, is quite a difficult topic. And I think we'll see probably more in that sort of space. So hopefully that helps for Timothy.
Great. Thank you, Gerard. Very good answer.
Can I come in with an extra observation? And that is that I think there are indicators in the rail social value tool for pretty much, you know, all the impacts of rail looked at through all different lenses. What we lack are monetized values, so pound values that can be put to all indicators. So of all the indicators within the rail social value tool, about half of them have monetized values associated with them. So if we think about, say, workforce diversity, there are no monetized values associated with those indicators because none have yet been calculated. So once economists are funded to calculate the social value of, you know, there being 10 people from ethnic minority backgrounds in the workforce as opposed to 5 or whatever, then we can integrate those monetized values into our tools. But at the moment, those values don't exist. And actually, carbon's another good one. At the moment, the value, the monetized value for carbon is the traded value of carbon. Actually, there could be real usefulness in a research study that values carbon more widely than that, and then we can integrate that value. So yeah, you know, where we don't have monetized values in the Rail social value tool, it's because they don't exist at the moment.
Can I just add just on that? That's back to that journey point, you see, because we're going on a journey, we're learning, and we have to improve that, and that will be driven by just new thinking, new literature review, new sort of policies. I mean, the carbon one is a particular one. I mean, obviously, recently we've had COP26, and everybody's on a carbon agenda, and there's carbon this, carbon that, and that has to settle down really and become a way of working, because you know, our area of focus is actually on what we call lasting legacy. So, you know, it's all right building a building for 5 million quid or doing a project for 5 million quid against one for 10 million. But if the 10 million one has almost zero carbon and very cheap to run, then over 25, 50 years, it's worth more to us. But, you know, the government has historically looked at things on a CapEx and not an OpEx basis. So if we can reshape the thinking, which I think CP2 and new policy directions will actually help us do that. So it's that journey piece.
Agree, and totally agree on, and two great contributions. Thank you. What, you know, on the point of one of the Ties Living Lab obsessions is whole life value and taking the whole life value of anything, and that's initially that's cost. And to Gerard's point, you could build a 5 million building or a 10 million, but the whole life value of the 10 million building might be a lot less. And we really want to make that. We really want to make that available to people, that understanding, because, and that's one of the things we're doing through the project, because that makes investment possible. Because, you know, why would you spend 5 million more if you can't see the benefit? But if you can see the benefit, it's a no-brainer, as they say. And to Liz's point, the science of measurement is improving. And I know how hard it is, and I've been around some of the carbon discussions, but we spent 18 months as NSAR looking at the social value of just some of the apprenticeship and work experience type activities. So that's just one or two really in the framework. So and there's a whole lot of work has gone into that. So you're right, but I think the audience should be left in no doubt that those will emerge, and what the tools and the approaches allow us to do is to drop that in as they emerge. Jamie, you were gonna, I hope, say something on this topic as well.
I was, but thank you. I guess just chipping into what you described, I think as they develop and emerge, the other challenge we faced is more questions will arise. I mean, I think Liz quite rightly highlighted the challenges around monetization. I think invariably you've got metrics that are easier and harder to measure. What one for me, almost coming back to the original question, but tackling it from the opposite direction, is what one of the clear metrics or inputs, should I say, that we use as part of the quantification is the number of jobs and employability. And ironically, when you're applying modern methods of construction through a more efficient methodology, then the concept is actually to diminish the number of jobs. You should reduce the labour pool. So you have this immediate tension that actually the one thing you can measure arguably is spilling out a reduction in social value. Now, that in itself spills out a whole host of questions, hence we're getting that sort of discussion around where do the tensions lie and what is the more positive outcome. Is it a reduced quantum of jobs but in better conditions and with better well-being, or is it the higher proportion but arguably with a health and safety risk?
Brilliant and challenging point. I went to a car factory in remote part of China, and there were 2 robots. And normally in a car factory, there's 2 people and many robots, but there were hundreds of people and 2 robots. And I asked the factory manager about this, and he said, well, we've been told by the government our role is to create jobs. So it's interesting. So they made that judgment, right? and so they're not modernising on the basis of social value. Really fascinating. But actually, I think this might sound a bit glib, but actually, I don't think it's as big a problem as you describe. Question as you describe, because actually we face pressing skill shortages in the UK with high levels of employment. We don't have enough people. And the real risk for our infrastructure projects is skill shortages and wage inflation. So if you reduce wage inflation, this is all measurable, and we are measuring it. If you reduce wage inflation by introducing modern methods of construction, you can build more. So you can do more, you can go faster with your existing workforce, or you can go more cheaply. But generally, there's an urgency to our need to modernise our actual infrastructure. That relies on lots of skilled people. We don't have them. So I think that for the next 10 years, I'm not going to be too worried about this problem, because we've got a very easy and quantifiable answer. Thank you for these very interesting contributions. We've got another question. This is from Christoph. Hi, Christoph. Christoph works for TfL. I think this is initially for Liz and then Gerard. Are the tools available to TfL and the GLA family? That's the Greater London Authorities family. If not, how do we go about getting them? So, Liz.
So in terms of the Rails social value tool, contact RSSB. If anybody goes onto RSSB's website, there's a sustainability page and there's a landing page for the Rails social value tool, and you can go through a menu, click down, and through their customer service portal you can log a request to have a conversation with them about this. I don't know what their licensing arrangements are, but speak to them and you can find out.
And before I go to Gerard, the RSSB is, of course, for those from wider transport, the Rail Safety and Standards Board. It's nothing to do with birds, so make sure you get your search right. Gerard. You're going to say get in touch with you, aren't you?
Well, I wasn't. I was actually going to say if it's the RSVT, Rail Social Value Tool, then Liz's advice is correct. I mean, to see the MMC bit, which has obviously not been incorporated into it, and the wider loop stuff, then it's us really. There is a wider license approach for TfL, and anybody in that. I call it the RSSB family. I mean, maybe the wrong terminology for it, but it covers people like TfL. It includes all of the TOCs, the train operating companies, East West Rail, etc. So there's been, RSSB, to be fair, done the heavy lifting for everybody. But that will only give you projects in that space. If you are looking at other sort of stuff and they have a wider impact and want to look at modern methods, then talk to us. And through the Tides Living Lab, Neil, one of the things we were asked to do was to provide a route for people afterwards, which we have done, and that's where I would be happy to have our team show the demos. And the government have negotiated very attractive licensing arrangements for everybody as well. So because they want to have wider adoption.
Yeah, that's the point of the Tides Living Lab, isn't just to demonstrate, it's to get people using this stuff. So that's what we'll be measured on, is uptake, not just are we now wiser and more informed. Okay, there's another question. I think we're going to go to you first with this, Gerard. Does the Loop software only accommodate social value forecasting, or does it have the capability to capture social value based on public stakeholder engagement and feedback?
So there's 3 stages to social value measurement. We call it forecast, monitor, and evaluate. And our software does all 3 of those. So when you undertake a project or an activity, you put a forecast in. So I'm going to do this, and I want to have these many KPIs. And the system actually throws a few at you in terms of examples, and then it allows you to change it specifically for your own direct sort of needs. And then once you've decided to create some jobs or reduce your output of carbon or undertake a number of activities. What you then do is, over a period of weeks, months, years, depending how long the activity is, you add in what's actually happened, and that might be directly yourself as the organisation or the prime organisation or your supply chain. So you actually get that progress. So you can see how, if you're creating 100 jobs or 100 apprenticeships, you can see how you're getting on, and you can see where you're failing or where you're falling behind or where you're ahead. And at the end of the activity, there's a simple way of evaluating. Did we do what we said we were going to do? Did we get what we thought we were going to get? And that's called evaluation. The tools do it very easily. It's Liz has been seeing this particularly on the supply chain, where how you add stuff, and then the reports from it are very good. We produce reports automatically in the software, but we can also export stuff into Excel and other formats for onward management in your own sort of reporting. Okay.
Thanks, Gerard. That's helpful. So the customer experience and engagement is a feature at a number of levels, but particularly in the evaluation aspect of it. You can't really.
If that's what you want, how you monitor the KPI is up to you. We aren't prescriptive about that, you know. No. And if there's some very specific KPIs, what we can also do, it's part of the way we do things, is we develop additional KPIs, very boutique to that. I mean, it's not for this, it's not this part of this presentation, but we developed some software and KPIs specifically for the waste management sector. People like Suez and that, and they're obviously, as you can imagine, they'll be quite boutique. And they actually use a lot of feedback sort of stuff in that. So it can be used in the way you want to use it, and that's part of how we sort of engage with people on that process.
And that's a sector, waste management, where I think we've got a lot to learn about community and customer engagement, because they've had a really challenging time with that, and have really developed some sophisticated things as a result of that. Liz, you were nodding. You were nodding at points during that response. The customer feedback point.
Yeah. So with the Rail Social Value tool, there's going to be a 6-month or annual round of reviewing indicators and monetized values, bringing in new ones as they are. When the question was originally asked, it made me think to some indicators that we're using within Network Rail quite a lot, which are numbers of stakeholders that we've engaged with, numbers of people involved in co-design, and so on. Those are indicators that we're using and that are monetized, and that's really helpful to us.
Brilliant. Jamie, do you want to say anything quickly on that?
Well, very quickly. You know, I think the approach that Liz just mentioned there at the end, I think is great, because it reaffirms that engagement in the process, which I think is absolutely critical. So yeah, both Liz's answer and Gerard's, I think, are sensible ways of approaching it.
Thank you, Jamie. Next question for Liz. It says that's specifically addressed to you. Will Network Rail support their supply chains with education on how to capture their social value impact against the Network Rail priorities, social themes and outcomes?
Yes, I'm thinking about how to explain that. So in Network Rail, we're a heavily devolved organisation. Our 5 regions identify what their risks and opportunities are and choose to do things their own way. So a contractor who's working on the Transpennine Route upgrade programme might find that programme has different priorities to a programme down in Cornwall on our western route. So that means that we need to provide generic information that can be applied, or guidance that can be applied to different situations. So very broad, and we want to deliver that as cost effectively as possible. So what is already out there, the Supply Chain Sustainability School, which we're a partner of, has a free e-learning module on introduction to social value that absolutely any current supplier or potential supplier can access and use for free. That actually includes Network Rail's social value framework. So that's a great starting point. Yeah. The Rail social value tool landing page on RSSB's website includes training videos and guidance on how to use the Rail social value tool itself, so people can use that. Within Network Rail, me and my very small team are supporting people around the business in our regions, and we expect them in turn to support their supply chains.
Liz, thank you. Now, there's a really important nuance in there. So yes, you are going to educate and train people, actually, but what you're not going to do is think for them, which is good. And there will be local variation in priorities, and that's the whole point. It's the whole point of devolution, and it's the whole point of having a broader, flexible framework. So really great reminder there. Thank you. We're out of time for questions, so thank you very much to our delegates for these questions, and a particular thank you to our panel for, I think it'll be quite clear that the level of knowledge on this topic around the room. Thank you to Gerard and Jamie and your teams for the work you've put into the Living Lab project. We've enjoyed working with you and your teams to get to where we are now, and I'm delighted that with where we've got to in terms of both the outputs and the wider policy synergy, and this will be taken forward in different ways in the different transport subsectors, as we've heard, but the broad picture will be the same intellectually anyway, is that this is something we need to get on with. And Liz, good luck with the launch of your work next week. I know how hard much work you've been putting into this, and I know that's going to be successful as well. And we'll look forward to working with you on specifics of that. To the wider delegates, thank you so much for coming and for your attention and your questions and your engagement. The test of Living Lab isn't like a school test. Do you now know? We could ask you a 10-point question on the fundamentals of social value. You'll be relieved to hear we're not going to do that. What we are going to ask you, though, is if you wouldn't mind filling in a survey, which is a very short survey. It's really important for us because we are measured on, as Ties Living Lab, we are measured on not just providing some products and services and tools, but actually their uptake. So you're in that survey, you'll be asked about your future intentions, etc., etc. It's confidential, but it will really help us. So please complete the survey. It won't take you long. Really important for it. This isn't one of those happy sheets at the end. It's a fundamental part of our processes. So thank you in anticipation. As I said earlier, there are 4 of these online events, and we would love you to come to all of them. And your attendance will be rewarded with a CPD certificate and a chance to be in the draw for the iPad, and also to get a guaranteed place at one of the set piece conferences in May and July, where all the great and the good will be there. It remains for me to say thank you to everyone for all you've contributed. Thank you to my team for putting this together, and there'll be plenty of ways of being in touch with any of the panel or my team afterwards. So please do that. Please make this I'm going to pick up Gerard's rather lazy, but we'll give him credit for it. Transport analogy. We're on the journey now, so please stay with it. And this is genuinely an exciting moment where things that a lot of us have thought were important for all our lives perhaps are really now taking their proper place in the wider economic understandings. And it's not, I mean, I do presentations on this to senior industry leaders, and I put it rather bluntly, which is that if we don't get this right now, you can forget future investment in transport infrastructure, because other industries are better at this than us, let's be honest. Submarines, the social value of a submarine is well understood. Yeah, the social value of broadband, well understood. The social value of energy, and as Gerard says, energy investments, well understood. So colleagues are ahead of us, and Gerard mentioned waste management. You know, there's an industry that has taken huge strides. So we've got some catching up to do, ladies and gentlemen. So, and the people around this panel are the people that are helping us get there. So please, the ball's back in your court now. Please engage with this and help move us all forward. Thank you again for your attendance. Have a good rest of the day.